For more than 2,000 years, the world's greatest armies have shared one dangerous belief. They believed that victory belonged to the stronger force, the larger army, the better weapons, the most experienced soldiers. Again and again, history proved them wrong, because somewhere between the battle plans, the marching columns, and the roar of cannon fire, there existed another kind of strategy. A strategy so dangerous that even brilliant commanders feared facing it. Not because it relied on overwhelming strength, but because it turned strength into weakness. It invited powerful armies to advance, only to discover they had already lost before they fired the decisive shot. Entire empires have collapsed because of it. Legendary generals have watched unstoppable victories disappear within days. And some of history's greatest military disasters began the exact moment an army believed it had already won. This is not the story of one battle. It is the story of an idea that traveled from the hills of ancient Italy, across medieval kingdoms, through the battlefields of Europe, and into modern military academies. An idea that still shapes warfare today. Because the most dangerous strategy in history is often the one your enemy wants you to believe is a mistake. Throughout history, commanders have searched for a perfect formula. Some believed discipline was everything. Others trusted speed. Many placed their faith in overwhelming firepower. Every generation produced new weapons that promised to change warfare forever. Longbows, cannons, rifles, machine guns, aircraft, missiles. Yet despite centuries of technological progress, one truth refused to disappear. Wars were rarely won by strength alone. Again and again, armies that appeared unstoppable found themselves trapped by opponents with fewer soldiers, fewer resources, and almost no chance of victory. At first glance, those victories seemed impossible, but they were not accidents. They followed a pattern built on patience, psychology, timing, and understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood himself. The secret strategy was never about destroying an army in one glorious battle. It was about quietly changing the battlefield until victory became impossible for the stronger side. That required something few commanders possessed: discipline. Because nothing is harder for a military leader than refusing a battle that everyone expects him to fight. Imagine leading thousands of soldiers. Your officers demand action. Your government demands results. Your people expect victory. Every instinct tells you to attack. But instead, you wait. You retreat. You disappear. To many people, that looks like weakness. To a master strategist, it is often the beginning of victory. More than 22 centuries ago, the Roman Republic faced one of the greatest military geniuses the ancient world had ever seen. His name was Hannibal. After crossing the Alps with elephants and thousands of exhausted soldiers, he entered Italy and began defeating Roman armies one after another. Each victory seemed more unbelievable than the last. Entire Roman legions disappeared. Experienced commanders were killed. Panic spread through Rome itself. The Republic faced a terrifying question. How do you defeat an enemy who wins every battle? Most Roman leaders believed the answer was simple. Raise another army. Fight again. Win through determination. One man disagreed. His name was Quintus Fabius Maximus. Unlike many Roman politicians, Fabius cared little about glory. He cared about survival. He looked at Hannibal's army and recognized something others refused to admit. Meeting Hannibal in another grand battle would probably end exactly like the previous ones. More Roman deaths, more defeats, more panic. So Fabius made a decision that shocked his own people. He refused to fight. Roman citizens mocked him. Many senators called him a coward. Some accused him of destroying Roman honor. Even his own officers became frustrated as Hannibal marched through the countryside almost unchallenged. But Fabius saw something his critics could not. Every mile Hannibal advanced carried hidden costs. Food became harder to find. Supplies traveled farther. Allied tribes became uncertain. Every victory pushed Hannibal deeper into hostile territory. Fabius did not chase glory. He chased time. His soldiers shadowed Hannibal from a distance. They attacked small supply groups, destroyed food stores, blocked roads, forced constant movement. Whenever Hannibal prepared for a decisive battle, the Romans simply refused. The greatest battlefield commander in the world slowly discovered an unexpected problem. His brilliant tactics meant nothing if nobody accepted battle. For months, frustration replaced momentum. Hannibal remained dangerous, but every passing season weakened his position. Without realizing it, Fabius had transformed time into a weapon. It was not exciting, it was not heroic, but it worked. Centuries later, military historians would give this approach a name: the Fabian Strategy. And although the weapons changed dramatically over the next 2,000 years, the idea never disappeared, because every generation eventually learned the same painful lesson. Sometimes the fastest path to victory is refusing to fight the battle your enemy desperately wants. As centuries passed, kingdoms rose and disappeared. Empires expanded across continents. New weapons replaced old ones. Yet the strongest commanders kept rediscovering the same uncomfortable truth. Victory was not always decided by courage. Sometimes it was decided by patience. A disciplined army could march farther. A wealthy empire could build more cannons. A powerful navy could dominate the seas. But none of those advantages mattered if a commander could be manipulated into fighting under the wrong conditions. That was the real purpose of the strategy. It was never simply about retreating. It was about controlling the enemy's decisions. The greatest generals understood that every army has habits. Every commander develops expectations. Every victory creates confidence. And confidence, when left unchecked, slowly becomes overconfidence. That is the moment the trap begins. A commander who believes he understands the battlefield often stops asking questions. He attacks faster. He scouts less carefully. He trusts old victories more than new information. Without realizing it, he starts making decisions for his enemy. History repeatedly punished leaders who fell into that illusion. Military thinkers eventually realized that war was fought in two different worlds. The first was physical: soldiers, weapons, food, roads, fortifications. The second existed entirely inside the human mind: fear, confidence, hope, impatience, pride. An army could remain physically strong while collapsing mentally. Likewise, a smaller force could appear weak while secretly growing stronger every day. The commanders who mastered this invisible battlefield rarely needed spectacular victories. Instead, they slowly changed how the enemy thought. One successful deception created hesitation. Hesitation created confusion. Confusion created mistakes. And mistakes destroyed armies far more effectively than swords or bullets. That is why intelligence became almost as valuable as soldiers. Knowing where an enemy planned to move was important. Knowing what he believed was even more valuable. Because people do not react to reality. They react to what they think is reality. A clever commander could build an entire campaign around that simple fact. Sometimes a retreat encouraged reckless pursuit. Sometimes silence suggested weakness. Sometimes an empty road convinced an enemy he was winning. Meanwhile, the real battle was unfolding somewhere else entirely. Logistics played an equally important role. Most people imagine wars ending in dramatic battles. History tells a different story. Far more armies have been defeated by hunger than by enemy swords. Food became ammunition. Roads became lifelines. Bridges became strategic prizes. Every wagon destroyed reduced an army's strength. Every delayed supply convoy weakened morale. Every extra mile increased exhaustion. An army marches on its stomach long before it marches toward victory. Experienced commanders understood this perfectly. Rather than attacking thousands of trained soldiers directly, they attacked what kept those soldiers alive. Granaries burned, bridges collapsed, supply trains disappeared. Soon the enemy faced impossible choices: advance without food, retreat without honor, or remain trapped between both disasters. By then, the battle had already been decided. The soldiers simply had not realized it yet. This strategy demanded extraordinary self-control. Most military leaders dreamed of becoming heroes. They wanted dramatic victories remembered for centuries. Crowds celebrated commanders who charged fearlessly into battle. Few praised the man who avoided battle entirely. Yet avoiding one disastrous battle could save an entire nation. That required ignoring public opinion, ignoring political pressure, sometimes even ignoring angry officers within one's own army. Great commanders often carried a lonely burden. While others demanded immediate action, they accepted temporary criticism for long-term survival. History eventually rewarded many of those decisions. But during the campaign itself, they often looked like failures. That is why this strategy frightened experienced generals. Not because it was complicated, because it required discipline that few human beings possessed. As military science evolved, one lesson appeared again and again. Never fight because your enemy wants you to fight. Fight because the conditions favor you. If they do not, change the conditions, delay the battle, move the battlefield, disrupt communications, break supply lines, spread uncertainty. Every hour the enemy wastes searching for you becomes another victory. Every unnecessary march weakens his army. Every false report increases confusion. Slowly, almost invisibly, the balance begins to change. Then comes the moment every strategist waits for. The enemy finally attacks. Not because he has chosen the perfect opportunity, because frustration has forced his hand, and frustrated commanders rarely make careful decisions. By the time they realize the battlefield has been designed against them, the trap has already closed. The greatest military victories in history rarely belong to the strongest armies. They belong to commanders who understood that winning a war and winning a battle were not always the same thing. That realization would eventually shape revolutions, defeat empires, and inspire generations of military thinkers across the world. But no commander would demonstrate this philosophy more completely than the man who transformed an exhausted collection of ordinary citizens into a force capable of defeating one of the most powerful empires on Earth. That story would forever change the meaning of strategy itself. For many people, strategy means drawing arrows across maps, moving armies, capturing cities, winning famous battles. But the greatest commanders understood something deeper. The most important battlefield often existed long before two armies ever met. It began inside the enemy's mind. Every decision made before a battle shaped the battle itself. A commander who controlled information could control expectations. A commander who controlled expectations could control decisions. And once he controlled decisions, he controlled the war. That is why deception became one of history's most valuable weapons. Not deception for its own sake, but deception designed to create predictable mistakes. A false campfire could convince scouts that an army remained in place. A small patrol could appear larger than it really was. A carefully leaked message could send thousands of soldiers marching toward the wrong objective. The remarkable part was not the deception itself. It was how often intelligent commanders believed it. Because every army sees what it expects to see. If commanders believed their enemy was retreating, every movement appeared to confirm that belief. If they believed victory was certain, warning signs became invisible. Confidence slowly blinded judgment. History repeated this pattern countless times. One of the greatest advantages a weaker army possesses is flexibility. Large armies move slowly. Every decision affects thousands of people. Food must arrive on time. Bridges must support heavy artillery. Roads become crowded. Communication becomes increasingly difficult. Smaller forces suffer fewer of these problems. They move faster, disappear faster, adapt faster. This difference changes everything. Instead of defending every town, a smaller army chooses only the ground that favors it. Instead of protecting every road, it attacks only the roads the enemy cannot afford to lose. Instead of responding to every movement, it decides when and where contact will happen. Suddenly, the larger army is reacting instead of leading. Its greatest strength becomes its greatest burden. Every extra soldier requires food. Every cannon slows movement. Every supply wagon stretches the marching column farther into the distance. A commander who appears powerful may actually become easier to defeat. Not because his soldiers lack courage, because his success has created problems too large to manage. The psychological pressure becomes enormous. Imagine leading an army that has not fought a major battle for weeks. Your soldiers grow impatient. Your officers question your caution. Politicians demand visible progress. Newspapers begin criticizing your leadership. Meanwhile, your opponent quietly avoids every direct confrontation. Villages are abandoned before you arrive. Food disappears. Bridges collapse overnight. Supply wagons vanish without explanation. Nothing dramatic happens. Yet everything slowly becomes worse. This kind of warfare attacks confidence itself. The enemy begins wondering whether every road hides another surprise. Every forest becomes suspicious. Every report becomes uncertain. Fear spreads gradually. Unlike panic, gradual fear is difficult to recognize. It grows silently. Then one morning, an entire army discovers it no longer trusts its own assumptions. That moment is more dangerous than any battlefield defeat. Modern military academies still study campaigns built around these principles, not because they encourage retreat, but because they demonstrate discipline. A skilled commander understands the difference between avoiding unnecessary battles and avoiding war itself. Those are completely different ideas. Retreat can preserve strength. Delay can create opportunity. Patience can force an enemy into impossible decisions. The objective is never to appear strong. The objective is to become stronger while convincing the enemy the opposite is happening. That balance requires extraordinary leadership. Soldiers naturally want action. Leaders must sometimes choose restraint instead. History rarely celebrates restraint immediately. Its value often becomes clear only years later. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about military genius is the belief that brilliant commanders always attack boldly. Many certainly did, but the greatest among them knew exactly when not to attack. They resisted pressure, ignored insults, accepted temporary embarrassment, because they understood something few others recognized. A battle can be won before the first shot is fired. If an enemy arrives exhausted, hungry, confused, overconfident, poorly informed, then the outcome has already begun taking shape. Weapons simply complete the process. That is why strategy always outranks tactics. Tactics decide today's battlefield. Strategy decides tomorrow's victory. The commanders remembered for centuries rarely possessed the biggest armies. They possessed the clearest understanding of human nature. They knew people become predictable under pressure. Predictable enemies become vulnerable, and vulnerable armies become history. The greatest generals never chased battles. They shaped circumstances until battle became unnecessary, or until victory became almost inevitable. That was the true secret. Not superior numbers, not superior weapons, but superior understanding. History often celebrates the moment a flag is raised over a captured city, the cheering crowds, the surrender ceremony, the triumphant return home. But those moments are only the final chapter. The real victory usually begins weeks, months, sometimes years earlier. It begins with hundreds of invisible decisions. One road left open, another bridge destroyed, a single convoy delayed, a false report believed, a commander choosing patience when everyone else demanded action. These moments rarely appear in paintings, yet they decide the future of nations. The greatest military disasters in history were rarely caused by one mistake. They were created by dozens of small mistakes connected together. An army advances one day farther than planned. Its supply line grows longer. Food arrives a little later. Horses become weaker. Soldiers sleep less. Scouts miss important information. Commanders grow impatient. One hurried decision follows another. Eventually, the army reaches a battlefield already exhausted. The enemy, who has been waiting patiently, finally accepts battle. To outside observers, the victory appears sudden. To the commander who planned it, the battle merely confirms what had already been achieved. The strongest weapon was never the sword. It was preparation. This is why the greatest strategists never measured success by territory alone. Cities can be captured. Cities can also be abandoned. Ground can be lost. Ground can later be recovered. But an experienced army destroyed through poor planning is far harder to replace. That lesson has echoed through every generation. Empires that appeared unstoppable collapsed because they chased quick victories instead of sustainable ones. Power created confidence. Confidence created impatience. Impatience created mistakes, and mistakes destroyed power. The cycle repeated itself again and again. History changed. Human nature did not. Even in the modern world, these principles remain surprisingly familiar. Technology has transformed warfare beyond anything ancient commanders could imagine. Satellites watch from space. Aircraft cross continents in hours. Information travels across the planet almost instantly. Yet the most valuable battlefield still exists inside the human mind. Confuse your opponent. Control the flow of information. Protect your own decisions while influencing theirs. These ideas remain as powerful today as they were thousands of years ago. The tools have changed. The psychology has not. Military academies across the world continue studying campaigns from centuries past for exactly this reason. Not to copy old battles, but to understand timeless principles. Weapons become obsolete. Human behavior rarely does. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson every commander eventually learns. Winning every battle does not guarantee winning the war. History is filled with brilliant battlefield victories that ultimately change nothing. It is also filled with quiet campaigns where disciplined planning defeated stronger enemies without spectacular triumphs. Real strategy demands humility. It demands accepting that temporary setbacks may serve a greater purpose. It demands understanding that retreat is not always defeat. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes the commander who appears to be losing is quietly building the conditions for an overwhelming victory. By the time the world notices, the outcome has already become unavoidable. That is why this strategy earns such respect among history's greatest military minds. It forced powerful armies to question everything they believed. It transformed confidence into vulnerability. It turned speed into recklessness. It made superior numbers difficult to use. Most importantly, it convinced ambitious commanders to make the exact decisions their opponents wanted them to make. No trap is more dangerous than one your enemy willingly walks into. No victory is more complete than one achieved before the decisive battle even begins. For over 2,000 years, kingdoms have risen. Empires have fallen. Weapons have evolved beyond recognition. But this idea has survived every generation. Not because it guarantees victory. No strategy ever can. It survives because it understands something deeper than military science. It understands people. And as long as human beings command armies, pride will create blind spots. Impatience will create opportunities. Overconfidence will create disasters. The commanders who recognize those truths first will always possess an advantage that no amount of money, technology, or manpower can easily overcome. That is why the greatest generals did not fear the biggest army. They feared the commander who understood time, psychology, deception, logistics, and patience better than anyone else on the battlefield. Because once those invisible weapons began working together, even the mightiest empire could collapse without ever realizing the trap had already closed around it. History remembers the battles. The wisest generals remembered the strategy. And in the end, it was never the strongest army that shaped history. It was the smartest mind.